All right. Flow of people in the waiting room has stopped, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. We've got a few different things on the agenda today. We wanted to start with check in on SRPC's Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy process. We are still actively researching and writing, but we wanted to take a few of the chapters that are furthest along and at least check in with all of you on where we're headed in case you have ideas for things that we're missing. But then we are hoping to reserve a pretty decent chunk of the call also to check in on outdoor dining and then to give Teresa Walker a few minutes towards the end to talk about some of REDC's ongoing planning efforts as well. So I'm going to, order of operations, I guess I'm going to share the screen first, and then all right, is that working on just the slide for everybody? All right. So our objectives really for this presentation to kick off are to discuss the research as we have it. Again, we're going to give you an overview of some of the key points we've identified related to each chapter. And then we'd love a few minutes of discussion. We only have about 5 minutes per topic to keep this going. But if there are ideas you have to help us fill in some gaps, we'd love to hear about it. A quick reminder slide or overview slide. Today, we're going to be discussing the chapters on economic growth, workforce and education, childcare, mobility and accessibility, and infrastructure. So we'll be hitting 5 slides. We don't have slides today on housing, business operations, age friendliness, or community vibrancy. They're still going to be in the plan. We haven't forgotten about them, but those were not quite as far along. And so we're going to need to check in on those at some point a little bit later. So I'm going to start off with infrastructure. Thinking about infrastructure sort of as a topic and as a theme, the importance of it is really how it supports both literally and figuratively other activity and other economic themes. And as far as sort of the overall assessment of the region's infrastructure, the state last report card was around a C-. The Seacoast, I think, is generally above average, so we're fine to good, but still not perfect. And that does vary sort of system to system. One of the more important things I think to talk about in terms of where we are at this moment in time is sort of funding and cost as a two-sided coin. If we're thinking about funding availability, there's more money available than is typical. And in terms of the federal funding, it's really fairly unprecedented to have this much money available. But thinking about our region, not all communities have the same access to that funding, just in terms of varying capacity to apply for funds, to manage the grants when they come in. And then thinking about the flip side of cost, labor cost and availability, material cost and availability, general inflation are all driving up project costs. And if the Fed raises interest rates to combat some of that inflation, that would also increase bonding costs. So while there may be more money available, a lot of it is going to be taken up by trying to offset some of those rising cost impacts on all of these projects. For system threats, yeah, we have the usual sort of climate change impacts, weather impacts, you know, all of the things that can actually disrupt the physical infrastructure. Cybersecurity is one that I am hoping to have a little bit of extra discussion on in this update, thinking about that as a threat to municipal systems and software. For example, if there was a denial of service attack that disrupted the operations of your water plant or your sewer plant. Contamination. This is, you know, probably mostly in the water and sewer space, but thinking about some regional examples, the PFAS study around peas, Dover's had to close some wells because of old landfills. The region, and really New Hampshire in general, if you compare it to the rest of the country, has a fairly large exposure to Superfund sites in general. We're more concentrated than other parts of the country. And then again, also thinking about some of the regulation that, you know, EPA is putting into place, nitrogen limits, going into the Great Bay. You know, that is increasing costs and scrutiny on the sewer side to not further add to that contamination. Political will also, yeah, it may seem a little bit tired to describe it as a system threat, but yeah, I think we've had to have a lot of different programs that have you know, taken up a lot of the voters' attention, and the reality is for most municipalities in New Hampshire, large infrastructure projects need to go to the voters in some form. So keeping that political will high is something to keep in mind. And then finally, ways to improve resiliency. Your shared or connected systems can either be a fail-safe if one system is disrupted. For example, Dover and Portsmouth talking about connecting some of their systems across the Little Bay Bridge. And advanced planning, whether it's your master plan, your CIP, your hazard mitigation plans, as a way to be more transparent, to have as much information as you can about upcoming projects, and to try and, you know, keep some of that political support, because people understand needs, people can anticipate what's coming, people don't like surprises. So that's what I've got on the infrastructure side. Any initial comments, questions, knee jerks? I'm not seeing any. Going once, going twice. All right, on to the next one, Natalie.
Thanks, James. So for economic growth, we're looking at big picture assessment of economic success, including overall employment figures, policy actions, and just general economic trends. So we start by looking at inflation, noting that the New England Consumer Price Index increased 6.9% in February 2022 compared to the previous year, with the highest increases seen across fuel, shelter, and food. We go into more detail on the plan, but I do just want to note that some of the inflationary factors of this are monetary policies, such as historically low interest rates, fiscal policies, such as CARES, ARPA, and stimulus checks. We have supply chain disruptions due to the high demand for products and services and transportation bottlenecks, and labor shortages connected to early retirement trends, the Great Resignation, and a shortage of affordable housing and childcare, and also geopolitical tensions that are going on around the world right now. We take a look at labor force participation in Stratford County. By the end of January 2022, we were still about over 3,000 people short compared to pre-pandemic levels. We take a look at unemployment in Stratford County, noting that it's better than pre-pandemic levels, with unemployment in March 2020 being 1% higher than in December 2021. And then unemployment claims in New Hampshire are also lower than pre-pandemic levels, with 1,854 initial claims filed in February 2022 versus 2,039 claims filed in February 2020. We also track policy actions and government support programs and changes seen over the past year. We had the continuation of PPP, which closed in May 2021 with a total of about 16,600 loans distributed to New Hampshire businesses. We had the EIDL, which also closed in December 2021 with a total of about 14,000 loans distributed to New Hampshire businesses between all EIDL iterations. We had the continuation of enhanced unemployment benefits and economic impact checks, all of which also ended during the past year. And then, of course, financial assistance to the state and local governments through the state and local fiscal recovery funds, which in total distributed about 23 million to our region's 18 municipalities. And then the most recent economic trend seen in the past few weeks has been the Federal Reserve's rising of interest rates to battle inflation, which may mean that we'll see an impact on credit card loans, auto loans, and mortgage rates. And we should also expect to see a few more increases throughout 2021 and 2022. What we can do to support resiliency, help connect public sector entities with private businesses, and support business resiliency plans to help withstand future business shock, and continue to provide technical assistance to support business operations. And that's what I have for economic growth. Any comments or questions? If none, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thanks, Natalie. So in terms of the traffic volume, we see more cars on the roads. The traffic has returned to the pre-pandemic levels. However, because the NHDOT relies on the revenues from gas taxes and tolls, the drop in traffic volumes in 2020 made a serious dent in revenues, causing long-term harm. So this gap could be filled with the infrastructure bill funding, but it's still enough to cover the entire cost. So the main issue concerning the transportation networks in New Hampshire is how to maintain the transportation infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, if New Hampshire lacks the in-state revenues to support these systems. At a national level, we're seeing new driving habits, more specifically reckless driving and speeding, with experts citing drivers' anxiety levels, larger and heavier vehicles, and fraying social norms. So although the vehicle miles traveled picked up to where it used to be, the revenue is still going down because people are driving more efficient cars, which could also be exacerbated by the current gas disruptions. And with the gas price spikes caused by the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, we've also seen increased interest in electric vehicle purchases because they're obviously not subject to the same price fluctuations. And this is where the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program comes in. We're currently soliciting priority sites for municipalities in the region to make them more resilient and EV ready when the funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law becomes available. We're looking for ideally public sites or sites that could obtain permits easily and could accommodate up to 4 charging spaces with ADA accessibility. So as far as the public transit goes, the coast bus service has seen slow recovery in ridership and is still at 50% below the pre-pandemic ridership volume, which seriously affects the long-term financial sustainability of the service. This is mostly due to the lack of funding support from the state and loss of fare and tax revenue. And everybody knows that New Hampshire has a growing elderly population, and we've seen an increased need for the ADA paratransit, which further puts a financial constraint on the service provider in the absence of regular ridership. Similarly, the Wildcat ridership was down 25% during the academic year of 2021 and 2022, with further planned service area reductions anticipated later this year. And so the resiliency component, we're thinking about like what modes of transportation make the region more resilient to to disruption. And so we're advocating for 15-minute walkable downtowns that support the local businesses, create a sense of place and cohesion, and are more environmentally friendly and resilient to disruptions. So in terms of the active transportation or non-motorized modes of transportation, I'm still looking for more guidance or suggestions. So if you have any, please feel free to drop them in a chat or email me later. And that's all I have for mobility and accessibility. Any questions or comments?
Can I just add one tiny thing, Susie and James?
Go ahead.
Just on the active transportation side and the economic connection, just a recommendation for everyone to keep their eyes out for a statewide rail trails plan in the future. It's in the drafting stage right now, and the RPCs are going to get a chance to do some kind of internal review of that, but they did some economic modeling that will put a number, a fiscal revenue number to the development and maintenance of state rail trails like the Rockingham Recreation Trail or the Cotton Valley in our region, with some pretty decent numbers. So just some interesting modeling to go along with that, to keep an eye out for in the future.
Thanks, Colin. And we do anticipate, for some of the like electric vehicle charging stuff, giving Colin and was it going to be Scott from RPC sometime probably next week to talk in more detail about those initiatives. So if you've got detailed comments or questions for them, write them down this week and we can grill them next week.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So moving on to childcare, I think maybe I'll go with the good news first, which is I think that even in our conversations here and in all conversations that are happening in the last year, I feel like childcare has become a much more highlighted issue. It's housing and childcare in terms of workforce development, in terms of the economy, are critical issues. It is a very fragile industry. The cost is greater than the profit, essentially. We have got some, I think I read 1,500 worker, losing my train of thought, sorry, 1,500 open childcare worker spaces in New Hampshire in the last year. It has been intensely exacerbated by the pandemic. It is a low-paying industry. There is a significant workforce shortage. Attracting and retaining childcare workers is very difficult. It's not like I said, it's low-paying and often doesn't have benefits. It's very labor-intensive. I think the pandemic, and particularly in the last year, has definitely highlighted sort of the weak points in the system for parents, for the childcare centers, for workers. The working population needs childcare. People are leaving the workforce because they do not have access to childcare or because of the cost. And this essentially takes people out of the whole workforce system. In terms of the good news, like I said, it is more part of a conversation, I think, and there's a lot of positive attention, even at the governmental level. There's a bill SB 446, which is aimed at what other states have done, doing like quarterly bonuses for workers or stay-on bonuses, and that has got a lot of support. In terms of resiliency, I think keeping the issue current and collecting and presenting more data. There's significantly more data available now than there was a year ago when we wrote our plan, which is wonderful. So I think just for us to keep collecting data, be able to access the data and know what's happening in our region and understand the whole system better, and include it in our plans and keep talking about it. Do we have any comments on childcare? Excuse me. Okay, moving on to workforce and education. Excuse me. As Natalie has already pointed out, there is an actual loss in the labor force, and it is significantly older and younger workers. Like it says here, the 60 to 64 age group and the 25 to 29 age group. Also the Great Resignation, which we've all heard about. As we know, every single building that you see on the street has got a now hiring sign. Everybody is struggling to have workers, particularly in hospitality and other sort of, I guess, lower wage sectors. Also, as we see, the unemployment numbers are low, but that's not the full story. People are either leaving the labor market, possibly because of childcare. We can't attract people because there's not affordable housing. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here. We've all talked about this a lot. But there are some interesting sort of innovative things happening, I feel like, with employers. I think, as Warren says, it's become a marketing ploy to get workers at this point. And people are creating new strategies for attraction and retention, sign-on bonuses, or paying for education or paying for training, paid apprenticeships. And the education sector is also seems to be innovating and sort of responding to this crisis by, I would say, like sort of developing new curricula, like our short-term qualifications, like 12-week med tech qualification, or sort of really honing in on like what sectors are missing workers and training people specifically in those. As I said before, childcare and housing are, again, critical to this. Without sufficient childcare, people can't work. Without affordable housing, people can't live here. I think also, I've been reading about how, particularly with the gas hike right now, that people who typically did commute an hour each way to work, those people are leaving because it's just not feasible. I think, in terms of resiliency, what we can actually do is what we are doing, which is having these conversations. I think that this connection, this collaboration is incredibly important. And now, obviously, with the CEDR BEA funding, we're actually going to be able to implement a program to help businesses to attract workers and retain workers. That's what I got. Any thoughts?
Yeah, very well done. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to Nancy for this. I would say that I think we should highlight on employer innovation. I think employer innovation is the cog to all three areas that's impeding economic growth. You know, as you discussed, the cost of housing, childcare, and attracting new employees. So, you know, I think employer innovation needs to take a very top level and all that.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Otherwise, that's our last slide. Last call. All right. And I'll stop sharing. Presentation. Okay. Thank you all for indulging us. It's good for us to check in on the work that we're doing, but it's also good for us to show EDA that we're checking in on the work that we're doing. So thank you for letting us take up that portion of the agenda. I think the next thing that people had wanted to talk about today was to get a sense of outdoor dining plans for 2022 and how municipalities may or may not be changing up those policies. I think a few of you distributed your applications. I think Robin and Chris sent around Somersworths and Dovers to a small group of people. So if it's okay, I'll boost those to everybody on the list when we send the notes out as well. But I guess particularly for the city folks, what are your plans for this year?
I'll go since no one wants to. So Dover, we see it as a threefold conversation: sidewalk seating, parking seating, and private property seating. And so what we've done is the Parking Commission has agreed to again utilize parking spaces in the urban core with the caveat that it not be on an arterial. So Central Avenue, Washington Street, or Main Street are not allowed, and that's from a safety standpoint. The recognition was that the governor's executive order of the past 2 years allowed some flexibility that we don't see is there anymore from an indemnification standpoint, from a alcohol standpoint, and from some adherence to ADA and other requirements. So we created a resolution which the council adopted last Wednesday, which says between April 15th and October 15th, public parking spaces can be leased from the city for that 6-month period or a prorated version thereof for approximately $1,100 per space for that period. And that goes to cover both the lost revenue from the parking activity fund, but also for the staff time to set up and take down barricades and to provide the barricades from a public safety standpoint. The restaurants do have the opportunity to bring their own barricades if they prefer, or to augment ours so they could make them a little bit more attractive than the bright orange water-filled barricades that we will be providing. And we expect that a few of them will do that as they did in the past few years. We are requiring that they go to the Parking Commission with their plan first and ask to use the specific spaces with the understanding that not every space may get utilized. One of the things the Parking Commission is going to be looking at is the sidewalk capacity. As you know, in the past, the conversation has been about reduced internal capacity for restaurants. And so the outdoor seating made up for that. Now that internal capacity reduction does not exist. So we're looking at it from a how much is too much space. So the conversation is if you could have capacity on the sidewalks, and there are a couple of restaurants that have wider sidewalk areas, then maybe the Parking Commission doesn't 100% approve use of all the parking spaces that you've requested. We do require that the building owner and the business owner sign the application because we want to make sure that the building owner, which probably owns to the center of the right of way and is having their property rights infringed upon. So we want them to sign off, and they are part of the liable party should something happen and we need insurance relief. So that is the general direction that we chose to take. We have reached out to businesses regarding that, and we've had some feedback. Some have said they don't want to spend the $1,100, which quite honestly works out to $6 a day, and that's fine. They don't have to. Others have said, sign us up. Can we have more spaces? So we're seeing interesting response. We expect to start getting those applications back soon and start processing. The second level I mentioned was sidewalks. So we have, for $50, you can use the sidewalk space in front of your business, a much more stripped down version of the application, different indemnification, different permitting process. The parking process starts at the parking commission and goes to our technical review committee. The sidewalks just are internally reviewed by the health officer and the building inspector for compliance with ADA, et cetera. And barricades are optional on that point, things of that nature. The third level is we saw a lot of businesses use their own private property for outdoor dining. So the Paneras of the world, the businesses that maybe aren't located downtown and have off-street parking, utilizing some of that. Those we're going to continue to encourage utilizing there, but we are going to ask them to go to technical review and look at their parking needs and verify that they are not cannibalizing, if they're in a shared parking situation, that they're not taking away from other businesses in that shared scenario. So we're looking at those, and those regulations and requirements are still being drafted. We expect those will also go to the technical review committee. Beyond that, we've had some sort of hybrid areas where there's a couple of businesses downtown that have space that they want to utilize, and so we're going to continue to encourage them to use the outdoor dining options they've embraced over the past few years. And then we are looking, there's the Waldron Courtyard area downtown that we had spruced up a few years ago. We're working to provide some better Wi-Fi there, and then little cards, I guess, on the tables with QR codes for restaurants that maybe don't have the ability to have outdoor seating because they're on Central Avenue or another arterial, but could do takeout. So you could visit those locations, scan the QR code, order takeout, and go and get, and then bring back to the courtyard where we have, I'd say, 8 tables. We're looking to expand that in some other areas. So providing those businesses that maybe aren't in a location where we could do outdoor seating in wide sidewalks or parking, but still want to be encouraging people to take advantage of their options for takeout. So we're looking to do that as well. Happy to answer any questions.
A lot of great info. I was just trying to keep up. So when you were talking about the private property stuff that's going to be going through TRC, are you needing to update Dover's site plan regs to allow them to act on those?
So
issues?
I don't think so, but I'll defer to the planning director. I would tell her historically, I don't think so. The way we've always looked at it is in the past, places that have outdoor dining, because it tends to be seasonal, we don't tend to count it toward your parking regs. But in certain situations where we looked and saw over the past few years, people utilizing, or businesses utilizing parking for seating, that's where the concern comes in. The flip side is Dover operates under a parking maximum requirement. So if the business can show us that they're not impacting their own parking needs, we're going to be a little bit more tolerant. The flip side and the concern side is if you're in a plaza or if you're in a scenario where you've got shared parking and the other businesses are then made at a detriment to yours, that's when we're going to want to take a look at it. Presumably though, and this is the libertarian in me, the business owner or property owner would not sign off on the application if they knew that the application was going to hurt other tenants in their own property. So, it's a trust but verify scenario. But those areas we did contemplate adding to our site regulations 2 years ago provisions, and it was determined at the time that there was no need because our outdoor, our physical location section of the site regs already contemplated ancillary uses.
Okay.
Chris, I have a couple questions for you. Did you say
Anyone
that?
but Warren, anyone but Warren.
Oh, then I'm out.
Yeah.
Why? Did you so question about so arterial ways would be the main streets. I get it, Central Ave, maybe Main Street. So non-arterial ways will not allow outdoor dining on the street. Is that accurate? I mean,
So-
arterial ways. Arterial ways.
Right. So we looked at, from a public safety standpoint, if you
Right.
had Central Avenue, Washington Street, there's not a lot of restaurants up front on Chestnut, but Main being the other one where you could. We looked at where those outdoor parking spots, on-street parking spots would be and how they would be accessed. And we found that with the speeds, the congested area, and the lane widths, that it could be problematic.
I agree.
So,
But non-arterial ways such as,
correct.
right.
So
Okay.
Hale Street, First Street, Second Street, St. Thomas, all of those are available.
Wow. Okay.
And I should also note that we're talking outdoor dining, but if a retail came forward and wanted the same privileges, we believe that you can't discriminate in that
Right.
standpoint. So we would be open. We have not heard that, but and so we've focused on dining as well.
So my second question is, because I have a lot of restaurant clients, of course. My second question is around sidewalk dining. You mentioned $50. So two questions on sidewalk dining. Number one, what's the determinant on whether a sidewalk is wide enough? I'm thinking about like in front of Harvey's as an example. It's pretty wide there in front of Sassy Biscuit. You know, those have a lot of width, but possibly on 3rd Street is not a lot of width there. So what's the determinant on that? And did you say $50 for a seasonal permit?
Yeah, so inspections determined that the cost for them to do their review would be $50 for the sidewalk.
For the whole season, Chris?
Yep, that's what they
Okay.
determined. Remember, we're pro-business here. The real constraint, I think, is keeping ADA compliant with for flow back and forth between your dining area and the pedestrian flow. So that's what they're typically looking at is a 40-inch width so that a wheelchair or a walker could comfortably get by. And I agree with you. Some sidewalks are not going to be able to accommodate that. What we're looking at through a couple different grant opportunities and projects is, I would say in 2010, we changed the zoning to require 6 to 10 foot wide sidewalks downtown for new development. And so we're looking at, from an infrastructure improvement standpoint, the community coming in and widening other sidewalks to better enhance wherever it's located, being able to do that for businesses. So if you're in an area, as you mentioned, where there's maybe 5 feet of sidewalk, it's pretty tight. So we want to look at ways where we can not impact the travel way much, but widen sidewalks, extend them to get to a 6 to 8 foot throughout the community.
So you talked about the indemnification issue, and that's something we've talked about before, trying to get legislation that would have provided some of the same, at least perceived things as far as liability insurance, things like that in the public space. So are you basically taking the approach that if you firm up the process a little bit, maybe formalize the application, make sure that everybody's on board, that at least there's a clear transferal of some of that liability then to the operator?
Yeah, I look at it as that there's an accountability that, you know, just as if you were going to rent additional floor space, move to a larger restaurant per se, your rent would go up and your insurance requirements would change. We look at it the same way, as that because the capacity is no longer restricted inside, you are essentially doubling or adding on to your floor space. So A, you need to pay for that through the rental, and B, you need to be held accountable if there is any outstanding issues. So, and I think
So by having the fee and or the rent, that's basically saying you are renting this space to become part of your business that's covered by all of your business liability insurance and all of that.
correct. And we still, the way we looked at it was there's other statutes and regulations that are going to apply, such as alcohol and other safety, public health requirements that you still have to abide by.
Have you had any issues with the state DOT for state highways? Is that part of the decision on top of safety to not do arterials if that's technically state right of way?
So I'd love to say yes, but it's you raise a great point. It was a unintended consequence or benefit, depending on how you look at it. But you're right. Portion of Washington Street, portion of Maine, and all of Central are state maintained, or not state maintained, state owned highways. So I don't know that we did reach out. I did not, but that is a great point. That without the executive order, I think we would have had to have those conversations in depth.
So a happy accident that you got around it.
Yes. Nice spin.
Other comments, questions for Chris? Robin?
Maybe not a comment, but thank you, Chris. Just to share with everyone, we're doing pretty much the same thing in so many ways. It's all been drafted, private property still pending, and the parameters of the sidewalk use is exactly as Chris outlined, contingent on ADA access and guidelines. But if it's helpful to anyone too, know that it's already on our website. And again, if it's helpful, it's city ordinance 12.8A is sidewalks, and 12.8B is on-street parking spaces. And James, you're going to send both out, right?
I'll take a look at what I've got, and I will ask you for links if I can't find what I'm looking for.
Yeah, the only thing, if I can share a little bit from Portsmouth, the only thing that really differs is that I think we have given a little bit more authority to our staff rather than boards and commissions to make decisions. With some of the restaurateurs seem to be a little different. Obviously, our pricing is very different. There is an interesting debate. The city parking staff did the math on what the average parking space would produce in revenue for the time that it would be taken away for the dining. And that number was $5,700. Yeah, so if you were a restaurant and you use 3 spaces, you're looking at a big old chunk of money to do that this year. Fortunately, City Council looked at that number and also thought that that was too much of a burden and would be very cost prohibitive. The math just did not work even for our most higher end restaurants. So they dropped that down to, I believe, $1,500 per space. So pretty close to where Dover came back. Our city sidewalk and off street, that has always been $10 a square foot, and it has remained there. So that's kind of where we're at in Portsmouth. We had 40 something restaurants participate last year. I think we've had 20 or so, 22 applicants so far this year at the city. I'd have to confirm with city staff, but that was as of a week ago. So I think we will, because of the costs being introduced, I think we will see some attrition there, and we'll be somewhere in the upper 20s for as far as participating restaurants.
So James, I'll chime in from Rochester too, and I think the Seacoast is we're all on the same page. Chris and Robin, a lot of the things that you mentioned is kind of the things that Rochester's doing as well, with the sidewalks, the parking spots, and then the QR codes and private property. What I'm noticing though in Rochester is kind of a different trend is our businesses prefer sidewalks, and that was a conversation that we had at the beginning of the year. However, in our downtown, where most of our restaurants are, those sidewalks aren't large enough with that ADA. So you can only have kind of a bistro table, and then have everything that you need for the barriers per liquor commission. So I think what we're doing in Rochester, and Mike will agree with me, and I think I saw Shanna on this call as well, and I don't know if we've had this conversation with planning yet. I think our long-term goal is to look at those sidewalks, look at the traffic patterns, and see what we can do to make those sidewalks bigger, so that we don't have to impede into those parking spaces. I know our Union Street parking lot, we've got a redesign happening now. They did some engineering this year, and that would add larger sidewalks on the back that would allow for outdoor dining, entertainment, some extra things there. So that's really what Rochester is doing, very much the same as everybody else. And we don't have the charge for parking yet. So I think you'll find that Rochester's prices are pretty reasonable. And then Chris, just to note, our TRG also is in charge of the outdoor dining, which is sidewalks and on street. And then for private this year, I reached out to every business that did outdoor dining on the private property before. We allowed for temporary. This year we're not. So if you're not changing the site, we require a project narrative, which goes to the TRG. But if you do have site change, that would need to go through a site change process. We've had 2 approved outdoor permanent locations this year, and we expect 1 other. But other than that, I think people are finding that it was too much work, and they're not as interested in Rochester as they were in the past couple of years when they needed that dining to keep the revenue going.
And
I can add a little bit from Exeter. We're a smaller community, so I think we do it a little bit differently. The town select board voted to give the town manager control and town staff control over outdoor dining. We allow it on town property. It's $200 a year, whatever amount of spaces you use. And we get sign off from planning, zoning, police, fire, whatever. We have a list, and we all do it. Takes 1 day. We all chime in our opinions. They get approval. Town manager signs off, and it's that easy. We also do require $1 million rider on the insurance policy though for the town. They use town property. We do not regulate off on other properties. So if someone has outdoor parking spaces that is not shared and it's theirs, they can use it how they feel. We don't regulate that at all.
Darren, our city manager signs off for the final approval as well. So it goes through TRG. So same as yours. I should mention that.
We don't have parallel parking, so we don't have the opportunity to provide what these other communities do.
I do want to note, I heard from 2 different restaurants the past couple of days that they did it the past 2 years, but they're not sure they're going to do it this year, mainly because of a staffing concern that if you have the outdoor space, you have to have someone to actually conserve it. And one person I talked to yesterday said that they got too much comments from people last year that the people sitting outside felt like they were in no man's land because there was not enough staff to come and bring them their beer when they were ready for it. So they're contemplating starting the season as is, and then if they need to expand, they'll consider it mid-season.
So Anthony Fauci came out today and said that we can expect more. We could possibly expect more restrictions with the BA2 and with anything else that comes out. So I'm glad we're addressing this now.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Chris's comment. Sorry, Robin. It does put a lot of stress on a kitchen too. So for some of our restaurants downtown, the size of the kitchen just really, they can't put more food out. So for some of our smaller places, it doesn't work. So I know like Julie Cutting at Cure has made the decision not to do the sidewalk this year just because of the capacity of her kitchen, which is like roughly the size of my office here. So it's tiny.
And we find the same thing with bathrooms because 1 bathroom for 25 seats. state regulation. We've got somebody that's dealing with that issue now as well. So
Sure.
yeah, we're running into that problem too.
What is the, does anybody know what the current regulations are around alcohol service outside? Was that, Darren, you were instrumental, and I think we worked together last year. I don't know where that ended up.
It ended up expiring at the end of 2021, thanks to a legislator from Seabrook.
Warren,
So-
I've talked to the Liquor Commission. They will be inspecting this year. So I've warned all the restaurants that, they did not inspect in the past 2 years with the temporary dining, but to give them a heads up, and they will need to schedule ahead of time to get that approvals from them.
But an approval is possible for outdoor
Yes.
alcohol service.
Yes.
And that goes
Yeah,
through the state.
they have to file to expand their permit, essentially. They're changing the footprint of their permit, and it's you can do that for like a one-day event. If you say the music hall wanted to do something out in their street, they've done that many times, but you can also do it for the season, that's my understanding.
And that goes to the state or to each individual town?
Eventually it goes to the state. There's probably some
State.
sign-offs at the town level.
Okay. Thank you.
Boy, that's great information about the liquor. I hadn't actually thought about that. Thank you. Just to offer to everyone too, Boston is in a full armor combat war zone over this between the restaurants and the city government. And I happened to catch a couple articles on it and something on the news, and if it might be well worth dropping into that during your lunch break or something. It was highly informative. Just an FYI.
I applaud. Yeah.
I think Boston is $750 a space per month. So I feel more affordable.
Maybe some of those restaurants will move to the Seacoast of New Hampshire.
$750 per space per month. Wow.
It's a war. Yes. It's a full-on war.
Yes, I've taken one or two phone calls that would be in support of Robin's comment.
I also would like to applaud the city of Portsmouth for allowing restaurants to approve, based on restaurants' approval, dogs in outdoor dining.
Yeah, that's actually a statewide thing, I believe now. That it's.
Oh, right. Statewide, right. Yeah, okay.
But the one thing I did want to just mention, since we're on the topic still, is there is an issue with some retailers downtown about outdoor dining. We have a couple retailers that are really opposed to it. One woman, and I understand, and she has legitimate concerns. There is a construction project near her retail shop. She sells and repairs sewing machines, so they're very heavy objects that are very expensive. So you don't want to, you can't park in the garage and schlep this thing 3 blocks. So there is a little bit of a rub there, and the city staff is working diligently to come up with compromises and work around solutions. So in the case of that sewing machine repair shop, she may get a 15-minute loading zone outside her shop. So they're working on that, and there's some common sense solutions out there. The other thing the city did this year was after 2 p.m., all loading zones become ticketed parking spots. So if you're in Portsmouth and you're after 2 p.m. and you see an open loading zone, grab that and pay your meter and you're good to go. So it's they've been trying to add some capacity there.
One question I got.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
One question I got yesterday, which was like a blast from 1991, was if you can smoke cigarettes on a public sidewalk, can you eat in a public parking space or on the public sidewalk and have a cigarette? Which I was actually, like I said, I felt like I was 30 years ago, because it just seems so odd to think of eating and smoking together. But that's a question that I forwarded to the city attorney to let him figure out, not me.
I just wanted to jump in a little bit. I'm glad to hear that there's been a lot more attention, not a lot more attention, but at least notable attention made to the ADA requirements for outdoor seating. I know in the past 2 years, when I go with my service dog, it just seems like there's nowhere to sit outside. They can't get in, and we can't fit in between the tables, and it's a little bit frustrating. So not only aisle widths, but just something to keep in mind that, you know, for service dogs, little discouraged about allowing dogs in outdoor eating. A lot of dogs aren't trained that well, and then when a service dog comes along, there can be issues. So that's kind of a concern, just another way to look at something. I know it's a minority of a population, but it is difficult for me to navigate the outdoor seating and parking spots taken up and things like that. You know, untrained dogs around trained service dogs can be difficult. And so, you know, the service dog has the right to be there. If dogs are misbehaving, they should, you know, be asked to leave, and just kind of those things to maybe think about. Just let people know that, you know, dogs outside are great and dining, but you know, there are some certain cases where the service dogs takes precedence, and just a little bit more thinking about access.
It's a great point. Nothing I ever would have thought about. Thank you for bringing that up, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
James, I have one more point from Rochester, which Ben brought up a great point. Rochester, you may see our dining disappear in the middle of summer because of those construction projects that we have. So we have a lot of things going on, and we've let all the businesses know. We had a kind of a public input meeting for all the restaurants and the retail. So we've let them know that, you know, any day we may say, hey, in 1 week, you got to pack up. We don't know if you can go back out, just because of the traffic patterns with the construction happening downtown. So that's a major thing for us this year with dining.
Good to know. All great points. I think that was a great conversation. There was also some stuff in the chat, so we'll be sure to throw that into the notes as well. We have just a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure to get Teresa the little bit of time that we gave her to talk about REDC's resiliency plan.
Yeah, do you want to do this another time, or I'm happy to go really quickly now? It's up to you, James, as our facilitator.
How long do you think you're going to take? Like 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Do folks have 5 minutes to stick around? Sure. All right, have at it.
Okay. I need to share my screen.
I need to let you do that.
Thanks, everyone, for sticking around if you can. The REDC applied for CARES Act funding, and we used that funding primarily to provide direct technical assistance to businesses. But we've also developed a resiliency plan, which is a reflection of a lot of the stuff I've learned from all of you as I've sat in on these calls and many other calls the last almost 2 years. So it's a resiliency plan, and it's designed to help municipalities and businesses focus on increasing their resiliency to short and long-term economic disruptions, including pandemics and weather-related events. You may know that the REDC CEDS has addressed resiliency in the last 3 CEDS. So we've been talking about resiliency for a while, but the focus of it really has been resiliency to weather and climate change, not long-term economic disruption. So we know from participating in that small business development center and the cooperative extension great workshops last year, that 48% of our businesses still do not have pandemic or resiliency plans in place. You may or may not know that FEMA requires every municipality in the nation to have a hazard mitigation plan and to update that plan every 5 years. FEMA does define infectious disease as a natural hazard. I write a lot of the plans in the Rockingham Planning Commission region, so I know firsthand that very few communities are including economic disruption in their hazard mitigation planning. So with our resiliency plan, we're trying to merge kind of these 2 worlds in a way. And we've developed a description of resiliency, or we haven't developed it. We've shared a description of resiliency. We're providing checklists for municipalities and small businesses on best management practices to increase their resiliency to short-term and long-term economic disruption. So the economic resiliency checklist for municipalities is broken down into 3 categories: general governance, which would be city managers and select boards and those what we call the town officials with those kinds of legal authority, community planning and economic development, and then emergency management. So kind of 3 spheres of local government that have an opportunity to work with businesses to increase resiliency and to work on all, also internal municipal policies and practices. So lots of the things we've talked about here as a group are reflected in these checklists. There's also an extensive checklist for small businesses. And we have additional resources too, with links for people to check on tools that they can do, whether they're a small business or a municipality, to kind of do a self-assessment on where they stand on being better prepared for the next economic disruption. And the plans in the draft stages now. We took comments at our CEDS meeting last week. James had a great one that we're incorporating. And then on May 4th at the next REDC CEDS meeting, we'll be hosting a workshop on how to use the toolkit. And we're pulling together panelists for that and sharing information. So this is one of the outcomes of our CARES Act grant, and we hope that its toolkit format and its link to resources will enable businesses and municipalities to give some thought to how they're working to prepare for that next disruption. And that's it.
Thanks, Teresa.
Sure.
Comments, questions for Teresa? Is that draft plan something I can also send around with the notes for people to take a more in-depth look at?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I was going to note that Teresa mentioned that we're having a workshop May 4th, and we'll be sending out flyers for that. It will be at our offices in Raymond, and I'll make sure James has it and he can distribute it, because it is open to anyone who wants to come and learn more about how to use the toolkit, and maybe how to help for those municipal leaders, how to help your small businesses locally use the toolkit.
Sounds good. Any final comments, questions from anybody today?
So James, Charlie asked for the draft plan. You'll share it with your meeting minutes, right?
Yeah, I'll send it around.
Okay.
With the
Thanks.
meeting.
I'd love if people have other things to add to the checklist or corrections, we welcome them. With the realization that those of you who participate in these calls are representing in communities that have you as a resource that many of the communities we work with do not. So we're hoping to provide them with information that enables them to work with, work within, I guess, their capacity to become more resilient.
Teresa, were you on the SRPC Resiliency Plan earlier or later last year? They had a great draft, and I have that somewhere. If you don't
It's
have
a
it,
link.
I can...
It's one of the hot links in ours. Okay. Yes, thank
Perfect.
you. I mean,
yeah,
the one yes, I did. It's a hot link in there. Yep. Hot link. I don't know if that's a term. It's an active link in the plan. Yep. Thank you for that.
Mikhail?
Yes, thank you. Looking forward to July. I'd like to bring in travel and tourism, if it's not already presented. I think the next round for JPP funding is up soon. So we're looking at July, and considering the role of travel and tourism on the Seacoast might be a good fit. So I'd like everyone to think about that date time frame in mind, and we can hash out the details later on. Thank you.
Sounds great. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Thank you all. Have a great week. Thank you for staying a few minutes over, and we'll see you next time.